Hello, everyone. This is André Fauteux, editor and publisher of 21st Century Housing magazine, La Maison du 21e siècle, based in Quebec. And today I'm very, very pleased and honored to have with us Bill Reid, who is a legend in the sustainable development, building, design community. Bill was a co-founder of the LEED Green Building Rating System of the U.S. Green Building Council. And I saw that you were designing homes, solar homes in the late 70s, Bill. Is that right?
Indeed. Been at it for a while.
That's how I got hooked to sustainable housing. I'm a reporter since 1988. I worked for the Montreal Daily, the Gazette, and then I worked for 5 years at Quebec, which was a housing weekly. And I met a lot of architects and engineers who told me about passive solar, how much we're wasting energy, polluting our homes. You surely know a lot about UFI, urea formaldehyde, foam insulation. So that made Canada and CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, pioneers in indoor air because Health Canada.
I destroyed a house with urea formaldehyde.
You destroyed a house, eh? Yeah.
No, it was a disaster using that stuff.
Well, I was close to a lot of CMHC scientists like Jim White, who was an engineer who co-designed the Canadarm for the space shuttle. And he is said to have coined the term house as a system.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're the guy to talk about this today, how to solve. We have Leonardo in the background. I love
I
that.
was just looking at that. Yeah, beautiful.
Let's find simple solutions to complex problems today. Can we do that? I'd like to say that you're now with Regenesis, a firm that is really not just designing buildings, but first I want to backtrack a little bit and talk about LEED. Why was LEED needed in the early 90s? 1994, I was launching my newsletter, which became a magazine, and you were writing the technical details of LEED. What was needed back then, and how did LEED get millions of building professionals and owners, as well as politicians, on board where other green building rating systems failed?
Yeah, good question. And Canadians figure heavily into this discussion, actually. So you mentioned passive solar work. So I was involved with the Passive Solar Industries Council and passive solar design. And we kept discussing, well, it's very passive. We need something active. That, it's too passive a term. And we had a discussion like this every year. And one year we were talking about it at a board meeting, and somebody said, I just heard about this group forming called the U.S. Green Building Council. And it was like religion to me, just like solar energy was a kind of a religious experience for me. Really, we can get energy from the sun. Who knew? I mean, so silly that we think that way, but who knew? But and then the U.S. Green Building Council came on board and said, oh, that's more whole. We need to have more, we need to conclude all of these things. And I'd love to talk about what all of these things really mean. But so that was the impulse for me to actually leave the meeting. I left the meeting. I stood up and said, I got to go. This is where we got to be. So it was that kind of an impulse. So while we were forming I was not one of the founders of the council, but I was one of the early organizers and founding board of directors. And we said, well, we're talking about green buildings. What's a green building? Well, we had an idea what a green building was, but there was no way to measure it, right? So we said, well, we're going to go to England. England has BREEAM. William Fisk was working in Austin, Texas. William Fisk was the head of the first rating system in Austin, Texas. BREEAM came through the 5 developers in the city wanting to just differentiate themselves. And we said, well, we'll borrow BREEAM. Well, BREEAM cost money. I don't know, like 3,500 pounds or something like that to do an assessment. And we realized that would never fly in the United States. To actually pay for doing something in the environment, you could barely get people to talk about it. So we've got to create a voluntary program. And even though we kind of knew in our hearts that this would be really expensive, it was voluntary. You didn't have to pay to have a rating system. And so we proceeded to develop a rating system. Rob Watson and me and, oh boy, Joanne Todd, Tom Palladino, a few, probably 6 of us that worked on developing this, and Sandy Mendler. We went through one iteration, and it was terrible. It was alphabetical in order. It had no system to it at all. And we realized, we got to go back to the drawing board. And the Rockefeller brothers then supported us in developing LEED version 2, which is the one that actually hit the ground in the year 2000. But it took 6 years to develop that. And I'm giving you probably more information than you need, but what occurred that made it work, and this is where the Canadians figure in as well, is that we didn't have many resources. It was all volunteer. We realized, well, we've got to have more volunteers. There were enough people who were really interested in the idea that we had developed this network, a very large network of practitioners who were all contributing to the various criteria in LEED. And that created the foundation for the council. That's what allowed the U.S. Green Building Council to really take off, is because we already had a really motivated core, a very large core group of people. Then the debate in Canada was, do we adopt LEED? Do we adopt, I guess it wasn't called Green Globes at the time. Yuri Skopek, if that name rings a bell, was working on another rating system for Canada, kind of modifying BREEAM from England. But Ray Cole at UBC evaluated this work and realized that it was the network of volunteers that made LEED powerful. And that's why the Canadians adopted it as well. So that's how it grew, is because it was this herding cats, but it was a very organized way of herding cats. And then it took off. Even though, and what I hope we can talk about a little bit, even though at the time when we were designing LEED, we knew that it was wildly insufficient.
Yeah, well, it was a great success because now governments say if we're building or renovating, we have to get a LEED certification. A lot of people love it, but a friend of mine, André Bourassa, was the president of the Quebec Order of Architects for 8 years. And he's a big critic of LEED in a sense that if you're just racing to accumulate points,
Absolutely.
it doesn't mean the building will necessarily be healthy or super efficient.
Or anything, Andre. It's all LEED was meant to do, in my mind. Number one, it was never meant to define sustainability. It doesn't. It defines green buildings at a certain level. And green buildings aren't sustainable buildings. No building is sustainable. There's no such thing as a sustainable building, if we want to take this further. It's the living system that's sustainable. It's how life actually lives that we need to be addressing. Buildings are an entry point to talk about that and to engage it. So so when we talk about sustainable buildings, that's impossible. It doesn't exist. Also, the checklist approach is fragmented. It begs point shopping. How many bicycle racks can you put in there? And it doesn't do transformation. It doesn't transform the way people think about the environment. It gives them a plaque on the wall. But if you think about LEED as training wheels, after you do 2 or 3 LEED projects and you realize, well, what do we have? We have a slower way to die, as Bill McDonough says. And so what else is needed? And that's what LEED should be doing. Unfortunately, it still isn't. There are so many people still thinking that the checklist approach is sustainability that we've actually created a bit of a Frankenstein out there. So I occasionally will use LEED as a guide because it's nice to be reminded, oh yeah, I forgot to do that. But we typically recommend that people do not get certification, that they tell the story about how their building is evolving and continually improving. That's what you really want to do with these kind of initiatives and criteria. All right, I'm talking too much. I'll stop.
Oh. Certainly, the USGBC and other initiatives have broadened the audience of active building professionals and politicians, I said, and others involved. But today, what percentage do you think in the US of the building industry is really committed to green, healthy, sustainable compared to 20 years ago or 25 years ago?
Not much more. I don't know. I mean, there's 100,000 lead accredited, over 100,000. I don't keep track of these numbers, so
Maybe
don't.
10% of the market, or
No, I don't think so.
not even?
Not even. Maybe 5.
So that's
Look,
still,
look at where we are in the environment. Look where we are in the health of the planet. We are worse off than we were 10
yeah.
years ago, 20 years ago. So this whole fragmented approach, which is what I would like to talk about, the whole checklist approach is a piecemeal approach to the environment. Life does not get solved by solving one little aspect. You have a heart attack, you can throw a stent in your body, but that doesn't solve the problem, right? Exercise, nutrition, stress. You want to, most of what we're trying to solve are the symptoms, not the core purpose. So we'll never get there. And this is the Jevons hypothesis, right? Are you familiar with that from England in the 1800s? The idea that once we develop efficiency, we won't, as a whole, we will create more inefficiencies because more and more people will assume they can engage in that inefficient process that they're doing more efficiently. So, and that's been proven. We are not saving anything. So the whole mental model that we use to approach the environment and the built environment is ineffectual.
So we have to really change our mindset that you were talking about, regeneration is
Right.
apologizing to nature and changing our relationship with nature. Let's talk about that a little bit. What's this paradigm shift that you're?
Yeah, the paradigm shift is that life works as a whole living system. And that when we try to fragment and problem solve, we will only make it worse. I'm sounding pretty obnoxious, like I'm making these absolute statements, but evidence proves that statement true. That when you try to solve one problem, 3 or 4 others pop up. So we try to solve climate change by reducing carbon. That's the wrong approach. It is not a bad approach, but it's wildly insufficient. It's something, we got to do it. And I'm not saying don't do it, but what we really need to be looking at are, to replace a tree with a solar panel is wrong-headed. The tree is a much better solar processor than a solar panel. So plus they're dumping humidity into the air and causing rainfall to happen with particles that are emitted from the tree. It's a whole cycle, complex cycle of life that, Janine Benyus says, nature has had 3.5 billion years to practice. Why not learn from her, right?
Yeah. I was introduced to building biology in the early 90s.
Biology.
Biology, in so many countries out of German universities, architects were behind it because they noticed people were getting more and more sick.
Right.
I actually went to Santa Fe 2007 for their national conference, and their motto is just get closer to nature and mimic nature. Can you tell me a little bit about home? If you work with home developers, residential developers?
A lot.
Okay, because
let me, Andre, can I just pause for a second? That this is, it's not just about mimicking nature; it's becoming nature.
Yeah, we are nature. David Suzuki says it. We
right.
are.
David Suzuki. Right. So how do we be? But that's an easy throwaway line. Yeah. The point is that this is a metaphysical and moral practice that we actually have to transform ourselves in the process. We have to actually fall in love with life again. And we have to fall in love with each other. Now, considering the political climate on the planet, we got a long way to go. But what's interesting is that what our experience is that we introduce people to the way life wants to work in the places they live. They fall in love with each other. And it's a practice. It's not building a building. The building is an acupuncture point for a practice of engagement. Okay, just wanted to get that off my chest.
We need coaches like you because, in Quebec, we have a program inspired by the Art 2000 program called Nouveau Climat. And, it's voluntary, there's subsidies, but nobody's applying it. Maybe more LEED buildings are being certified homes than Nouveau Climat. But I always tell people, first thing, belt and suspenders, the first thing you want to do is hire one of these builders who is in the group select, it's their standard product. The house is going to be inspected independently. You'll make sure that it's airtight, well insulated and well ventilated. But after that, these builders, well, millions of people need quality housing really fast. So they have to cut down forests or woods. And the people like me going cross-country skiing in the mountain right here, I don't want to have 50 homes, but I'm going to have about 30 homes in my mountain very soon.
Yep.
So there's in Saint-Jérôme, which is the second largest city north of Montreal. There's one of these great builders, Tréma, that I recommend people. This is a great builder, but there's big opposition because they have to cut down woods in Saint-Jérôme to build this development. And these are all row houses. They're really densifying. So tell me about how you're approaching it. You're not just talking to the developer, you're engaging communities to look at the whole societal and environmental impacts.
That's right.
How can you convince developers who are just interested in profit? How can you help them? Because there's a lot of backlash, a lot of not in my backyard out there.
Yeah, well, that's a complex question, but yes, we have to address it. And number one, we don't try to convince developers anymore who are interested in just profit. They aren't worth, we can't do it. If they do not want to understand, then there's no chance of them understanding. Until people are willing to ask a question, they're not going to learn. We are certainly interested in working with any developer who says, I've been thinking about that, or yeah, I know that I'm doing some crappy stuff out there and I'd like to improve. I don't know how to do it. Now, those are good clients.
Yeah.
And hopefully, so spending my time trying to convert people who are antithetical to I call common sense thinking, just aren't
good work to be done with good people who want to do it right now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good people out there that want to do the right thing. They just don't know how.
Yeah.
And so our work is primarily with those who are. There's so much good work going on out there, Andre. It's just under the radar.
Examples. Have you done any in Canada at all?
Oh,
housing development?
I do more work in Canada than any other place on the planet, actually.
Oh, really? Oh, that's good.
So I work in Vancouver a lot. There's a conference, by the way, I'll be speaking at in 24th and 25th of May in Montreal, just to let you know. Look it up, don't know the name of it, but anyways.
24th, 25th, yeah.
Yeah. Part of it, some of it will be in Laval.
Who's organizing it?
Michelle Rousseau. Let me just see. I just got some emails on that today.
I know Michelle. Yeah.
Yeah. But talk to Michelle. He will, or Nancy Picard, or Michelle Rousseau.
Okay. So tell me about one of your favorite developments in Canada.
Well, I'll tell you this is kind of a long story, but it's pretty powerful. And that is, we worked on, we worked on 2 wastewater treatment plants in Vancouver. What does a wastewater treatment plant have to do with sustainability? But in fact, any project, infrastructure or housing project, doesn't matter, because it's an acupuncture point to engage community in transformation. And so we did a $750 million plant in the North Shore, Vancouver. And then from that one, we were hired to do a $10 billion plant next to Iona Island, just outside the airport. And the shift happened. They hired us to do integrative process design. I'm kind of known as helping develop integrative process thinking for the built environment, a protocol for that. So John Becker and myself were hired to facilitate basically 150-person client and design team, big team. And we helped them align around purpose. And they said, well, what do we know we're building a wastewater treatment plant. What do you mean purpose? Well, you've got to have a reason for building this wastewater treatment plant. What is your core purpose? The thing that really is wanting to happen because of this plant is want to clean the water. Well, why do you want to clean the water? Well, we want to create a healthier environment. Well, why do you want to create a healthy environment? And obviously it leads to, well, I guess we want to create a sustainable relationship with the environment. But that was never on their radar. But once we spent 2 months with them working on a purpose, which was basically to live into the sustainability guidelines that they had established, but never incorporated. And they had Metro Vancouver had great sustainability guidelines, but no one had ever done it. So then we worked with the team to say, well, what are we sustaining with sustainability? What we're sustaining is life. So how does life work? How does life work here? Well, we're on an intertidal wetland, or we're in an urban rainforest, or we're in urban agriculture. We have these concepts that we can actually say, how do we humans interface with life? And that basically turned this plant, infrastructure plant, into a way to heal relationships with the community. It was, I gather, I can't quote you on this, but I think it was the first unanimous vote on an infrastructure project in British Columbia history. We saved 98% of the change order amounts for the indicative design process. We reduced the design time by 25%. It just kept getting better and better and better. And every Miller Hall Architects, CH2M Hill, AECOM were the major parts of the design team. And they all said, in Metro Vancouver, and they all said it was the greatest project they'd ever worked on. Why is that? Not because it was so beautiful, it was nice, but it was because they were in a relationship in a new way that allowed them to discover new opportunities. It was a co-creative process. And because of that, we were then hired to work on the Iona Island plant. Now, their original aim, and here's the punchline here, the original aim on the Lionsgate plant was to save the taxpayer money.
Yeah, of course.
That's not absolutely very motivating, you know. So we said, no, that's not your reason. And then there was sustainability and community engagement and how do we actually use this as a relationship builder. And after that was done, and they realized that we're actually here sustaining life, the same director, Fred Nenninger, shifted the Iona plant and said, the reason we are building this plant is to save the orca whales.
Hmm.
That's a big institutional shift. And that allowed the coalescing of the Musqueam people, many environmentalists and activist groups to begin to work on the health of the Fraser River and the Salish Sea. That's what any project can do, whether it's a house or a housing project or a multi-use facility or an athletic center, doesn't matter. It can all function that way. So
give me an example of a housing development in Canada that.
Well, I can't give you one in Canada because we haven't done a housing development in Canada, but I can give you one we're working on right now in North Carolina, if you're interested. So we're working on 400 acres, all prime agriculture, corn, soybeans, beans, and yeah, that's it. So they need housing. They're desperately needed housing. We hate to take away the prime farmland, but you know, prime farmland is pretty deleterious as well. But what we learned is what we work on the nature of place. What does this place want to be? And we believe that humans have a right to live here, but we can harmonize. We don't compromise, we harmonize, because nature harmonizes, it doesn't compromise. So what we're working on now is how to create even more production, food production from less acreage. But the housing project is giving us the opportunity to bring this back to the living swamp that it was meant to be, because this is lower coastal, it's the coastal plain, low coastal plain, subject to great floods, and the Lumbee people, a very large First Nations group, basically were swamp dwellers, and they survived. There's 50,000 of them. They survived because they would retire to the swamps. They knew how to live in the swamps and farm the swamps, and the swamps were their protectors to prevent anybody else from coming in, the colonialists from coming in. So the swamps are still there, and it still wants to be a swamp. But how do we live in a swamp? Well, the Lumbee people know how to do that. So we're actually modeling this around the Lumbee people, as well as working on the local economy, so that the economy is a swamp economy. So the concept of this project is a swamp economy. So that's allowing us not only to work on the housing project, to farm agricultural farming, agroforest farming, not just row crop farming, and also to engage the community in self-discovery, because it's a very poor area. So we're actually adding value to the entire system that we're part of, which adds value to the development too. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I love about what you do, because you do a lot of research into the anthropology and the history of the land and the people there, not imposing outside solutions to
Exactly.
problems. It reminds me, many years ago, I wrote about Montreal's first straw bale home.
Mhm.
It took years to get the permit, but it was a lady architect who taught at McGill. And at one point, William McDonough came to Montreal.
Mhm.
And I learned that he grew up in Montreal, where we lived here for a while. And he was talking about the cherry blossoms and all that. And this lady architect was really irritated because she was saying, it's that mindset that's destroying the planet. You know, we have limited resources and all that. I just wanted you to comment on that debate, you know.
What the limited? What did Bill say?
Well, Bill said if you look at nature, the cherry blossoms, they're abundant. It's limitless how much nature by itself, if you don't screw it,
That's right.
it's going to reproduce.
If we work with nature, we will save. I believe. Listen, we are. If we understand and take care of nature, she will take care of us. And we will also, but here's the rub. This is where most people start thinking, well, who are you to say? And well, right now, we have impacted every square meter on this planet. There's not and the ocean too, for that matter. So what gives us the right to try to develop a new relationship? Well, that gives us the right because we're actually not paying attention at all. So how do we pay attention to life? Every project is an opportunity to pay attention to life. Every human activity is an opportunity to pay attention to life if we value what's important. So the credit, can we live with nature and can she amplify and support multiple evolutionary processes? Yes, if we allow her to do what she does best. And I wish I could share with you stories about how this works, but at some point, though, we have to understand that nature does have a carrying capacity, and the way we are abusing it, we are way beyond the multiple Earths we're using right now. We could survive on this planet if we used her properly, if we engaged and added value to nature instead of extracting value. And that's what's up for us, is how do we add value to nature? And what that will teach us, I believe, is that you have to reduce your population in certain areas. In other areas, you have to add population. It will actually get us to think about who we are and not just continually extracting to the point where there's nothing more to extract. So, and that means more than just, let me share with you 4 paradigms. Carol Sanford is a thinker in this world. First paradigm is extract value. That's pretty much what we do. Rip nutrients from the earth, right? Second one is slow down the damage, arrest disorder. And that's pretty much where the rating systems are, LEED, et cetera, Living Building Challenge, et cetera. They're basically saying we can do better. We don't need to have that. We don't need to cause damage. We can stop it. That's still not adding benefit. So the next one is do good. The do good paradigm is complex because I work in Africa, and I can tell you lots of places that have had the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund imposing a European and North American ethos on those groups and cities and towns in Africa. It doesn't work. So that's do good. I'm doing good, but really do good in its worst form is a form of colonialism. So how do we avoid colonialism? And that means, and by the way, an example is the next paradigm, the last paradigm is evolve inherent potential, evolve innate capability. And that means, and the analogy is my daughter, if I impose on her that I want her to be a tennis player and she wants to be a dancer, she's probably going to be in a psychologist's couch the rest of her life. So I can't impose my will on her, and nor should we impose our will on the ecosystems that we live within. So this work is about understanding how life wants to work in the places we live. And that is the way we get ahead. And that's, and no, Andre, I'd love to get to know you better, but that means that I have to pay attention to your patterns of life, how you live, what gives you joy. How can I actually fan those flames that allow our friendship to blossom? Not if I tell you to be somebody else.
That's why I tell my readers and clients, hire an architect. It's worthwhile, but it's a psychotherapy. You're going to take a
It
lot of
is.
time to discover who you are, what your real needs are.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
I, again, with my question, give me examples, concrete stuff that you convinced or helped developers discover they wanted to do, which were really leading edge and really different forms of development. Housing.
Well, we get housing. Well, almost every project has a housing component to it. That's for sure. We get hired often because of what Gurdjieff called and Bennett, two mystical thinkers, semi-mystical thinkers, called the law of three. That all life can be seen as an activating force and a restraining force. Democrats, Republicans, right? Conservatives, liberals, science, religion, heart, mind, quantity, quality. So we live in an age of duality. And that is death, by the way, which is what we're going through right now in our political system. Because what we think, the height of political sophistication is we think is compromise. And compromise is another slower way to die, like sustainability, a slower way to die.
Values.
What's that?
Compromise your values.
Absolutely. I'll give up a little, you give up a little at the functional level, or give up my values, you give up your values, and we'll call it a day because we both have our egos beaten up and we feel somehow satisfied. We need to excise that term from our language because it's killing us. We compromise here, we compromise again, we compromise again. So nature doesn't compromise. Nature harmonizes. But here's the metaphysical thing. It always harmonizes around the future. It always harmonizes around the potential, around evolutionary potential. Nature will always recover itself looking forward. It doesn't look backwards and say, well, where's the focus group to help me know what to do now, right? Who did this before so that I can justify my existence? No, look forward, but forward into what? You look forward into the potential that we want to live in.
Just composts its deaths.
What's that?
Nature just composts the past.
Yeah, that's right. And it births new from it. So
fertilize it.
So developers see us say that and they say, if you can harmonize, that's worth 15 years worth of lawyers. That's a quote from one client. So we're brought in, and I can certainly share lots of specific stories, but let me give you the general arc, is that what we do is we spend about 2 weeks looking at the patterns of life and having conversations with people, small kitchen table conversations. We're getting to know the community. We're learning from the community. We're doing research on geomorphology and water and habitat and social systems and all that, security, governance, business, economics. And we look for the patterns that keep repeating themselves. These are meta patterns that tell, and the analogy is, Andre, for me to get to know you, I look at your patterns of life and your interaction with others. That tells me a lot more than pieces of Andre. But when we go into cities, we're looking at pieces. Well, I'm going to talk about climate change here and habitat connectivity here and security here and beach erosion here. And we somehow think if we can glue them all together and get a living system. It doesn't work that way. So that's me like putting your heart and kidneys and liver in a vessel and stirring them around. I don't get Andre. So what we do is we look for how this whole system is working, just like I want to see how all of Andre is working with other people. And so that's a voyage of discovery. And we tell people, we're not here to solve a particular problem. We're here to understand what the nature of this place is. And that gets a little bit of, it's different, right? So they said that takes them by surprise. And yeah, we'll play along with that. And we visit with them and we go back and do some more research and we coalesce and refine our thinking. Then we go back to the same people and say, here's what we're learning. Are we on the right track? Well, no, or a little bit, or yeah, you're really getting warm. That second visit is when the magic starts happening. Because all of a sudden you're paying attention to them on their own terms. You're not coming in up and saying, here's the greatest design because I'm the greatest architect. You're going to love it. No, they're not going to love it. So we're in relationship to co-discover what is needed. Now, what we also say to the community is the developer is taking big risk here. They deserve a profit. They, however, do not deserve to tell you what they're going to build. We're going to decide that together. They're not going to vote on it because ultimately, but nonetheless, the developer wants to make you happy because that makes their business better. That they've got a happy community and a thriving community that only helps their investment. Their interest is the same as yours. Oh, I never thought about it that way. And we've only had one place on the planet ever reject that premise, and that was in Toronto, interestingly enough. But everybody else says, yeah, of course the developer deserves a profit as long as we're working together. And that process of unfolding, if the developers, and it's hard to convince the developer too. So we actually tell the developer, you're not in charge anymore. This is going to make a profit, but we have to figure out what this place needs together. And it takes them usually a couple months to understand how important that is. And once that happens, you're off to the races. And then it's a co-creative process. Now, the last step in this, I know I'm talking a lot, but the regeneration there's no such thing as a regenerative building. The regenerative process happens because you keep engaging the community forever. You don't have to do that, but what you're building is the capability in the community to actually work with evolutionary processes. And that's something that needs to be taught and, if you will, trained or coached through so that they understand the different nature of thinking. And then you have the opportunity for a sustainable condition, not until. Because the community has to own their evolutionary relationship with that living system. Then you have a sustainable situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So involving the developers with citizens, they have to understand it's going to be an evolutionary process. If I come back, to my example that you got to break eggs to make an omelet, you're going to have to cut trees.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, you're saying it's not problem solving, but seeing what the need is. Can you give me a concrete example of a project you came into where the developer had an idea and the citizens had another, and what not compromise but improved solution?
Yeah, well, we had a project in Chile that was on an oil tank farm, so there was no trees to destroy, but the city, there were 25 activist groups that called the developer the enemy. So that shows you where they were starting.
Where was this? Sorry.
In Viña del Mar, Chile.
Chile.
Just north of Valparaiso, the sister city to Valparaiso.
So the developer is always the enemy.
What's that?
The developer is always the enemy.
Yeah, well, in this case, they were literally called the enemy. And they had been working on the master plan for 3 years. They had it well developed. And you could drive in the city in 5 minutes and you knew that it was a dying city. It's actually one of the great garden cities of the world from the late 1800s. Beautiful place being destroyed. No, they were no longer, they had lost their spirit of that place. And there was an earthquake and they didn't have the money to repair things. And so it was just slipping downhill. You could tell that in 5 minutes. So we went to the city, we started meeting with the activists. Well, first of all, we met with the client and they said, well, we've worked on this master plan for 3 years. You're not going to make us change that, are you? And I said, I'm not going to make you change anything. You're going to want to when we're done, which was really frightening to him, the general manager. So we were hired. We spent 3 weeks meeting with 18 of the 25 activist groups, sharing with them that, yes, we were working for the enemy, but that wasn't our interest. Our interest was certainly to support the enemy, but also to support them, because there's a diagram. Maybe let me share this.
Yeah, let's see if I can allow.
You have to give me.
Can I allow you? Are you able to?
Let's see. Nope, you got to make me a co-host.
Yeah, where's that again? In not in participants. Video.
Don't worry about it.
Oh, hang on. Not too far. Should be in. Yeah, many participants. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. All right, so you can see the older, here's the project, right? Whatever it is. And typically the typical relationship is transactional with the neighborhoods. We'll give you a school if you give us permission to build our towers. We'll give you access to the beach if you give us permission. We'll build a park for you if you give us permission. And that's basically this quid pro quo, and it's a compromising situation. What we do is we say, we're all interested in the health of this entire city and ecosystem. That's bigger than most people can imagine, right? Which is part of what we do, is we help people actually hold the health of that system. Here's the developer right here. The developer is no more or less important than any other stakeholder. So what we do is we create a network of interested parties that are interested in supporting the health of this system. And they've never worked that way before. And what we do is we bring them together once a month at a lunch or something, and we start learning from each other. And it takes about a year of kind of effective, here's an assignment, let's do this assignment, next time we're meeting doing this. So they're very effective meetings.
You're doing what?
That attracts people.
Is it what, a year of monthly meetings?
Yep. And usually you have 40 to 50 people, 60 people, but then it starts expanding because things are getting done. The meetings are well run. Most people don't know how to run effective meetings. We're teaching them how to do that. And I can tell you in Chile what happened. The executive director of the Chamber of Commerce did not want to talk to a couple of gringos from the States. And yet 10 months later, he called up our client. He said, Ricardo, I don't know what you guys are doing, but count us in. This is the first time the city's been able to dream in 30 years.
Wow.
The mayor did not want us to talk with her sustainability or planning staff, even though they were very excited to do so. She thought it was a threat. Another year later, she called up and said, I get it. This is great. We're in. So you see what happens is it builds a field of energy. It's like a good party that's happening. That is the way even though it's slow at the beginning, it's the fastest way for massive change.
Yeah, once everyone agrees on what the mutual benefits and interests are.
Yeah, well, that's the story. That's what we do at that initial stage. We're working with everybody on what is core to how they basically we
Oh,
help people fall in love with life
I
again.
lost you there for half a second.
Yeah, what I was saying is that we help people fall in love with life again. And that's a heck of a lot better motivator than fear. Fear's good too, but
Getting away from fear, exactly, and thinking the other guy's going to eat your piece of cake. Yeah.
right.
It's funny because I wrote for a daily in 1988. I freelanced for 15 years for another daily, and one day I was cleared 2004. The editor said, "You're an activist." I have no problems with activists. You can be that, but reporters writing for me are not activists. And I said, "Oh, okay." I was trained political science before journalism, but when I started writing, there was a guy called Patrick Donovan who worked with the Nature Conservancy, West Island of Montreal, they're still trying to save the last woods on the West Island. And he just understood. He said, Andre, you're an agent of change. I said, okay, that's good, because we always do have that dual mindset of who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. No, we all want to be healthy. And I had severe backaches in my early 20s. So to me, it was number one on my list was health, No sense having energy efficiency if you're not breathing good air. But
right.
Since 1989, I've written, I want to talk briefly with you about EMFs, because it started in 1979 in Colorado, this link with power lines and child cancer. It was confirmed after 12 studies that you can double the risk of child leukemia if you overexpose the kids. And now the wireless, the radiofrequency microwaves have also been classified possibly carcinogenic. So
I can't hold this close to my phone, by the way. I'm that close to my head. I can't do that.
You feel it?
I feel it. I feel it in my hand, by the way.
I held a cell phone. I have one, but I borrowed one a couple of weeks ago, and I got like little shocks in each hand. I really flipped out because I am never exposed to wireless because I've been writing about EMFs for 5 years. But it's unfortunate because, again, it's this issue of industry being afraid of losing their profits and all that. And I think it's like with any pollutant, where as long as they don't have a gun on their head saying we're going to pass laws to limit your right to pollute, they're going to keep doing it. In New York City, they have 5G new microcell towers where people are feeling the effects, but also it's going to kill the aesthetics and the value of properties. In San Francisco, where it started, you got a $2 million condo, and just outside the window, a few feet away, you've got this huge, like, penis of an antenna. Why has the USGBC and now the WELL program, why aren't they looking at this EMF and health issue?
A great question. I don't know.
I think I asked you that question. I don't know if you were the head of the GBC back then, but I don't remember what year.
By the way, we talked about that.
Well, the conference was in Montreal many, many years ago. And I stood up with my heart beating and my breathing was really tight, asking this question in front of hundreds of people, expecting people to, throw me out of there. and the answer, someone answered, well, we'll deal with it when it's, like CMHC said, when it's not too marginal. But now I sent you an email this morning.
I know, I read some of those.
Linda Birnbaum, one of the world's top toxicologists. She was the head of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. She's now retired, and she's very worried about children's health and 24/7 wireless exposure.
Yep.
So I can only encourage you to read what I sent you, notably Frank Kleck's paper.
Andre, you don't need to convince me about that. I have other initiatives that I can't do everything, but one of my partners in Santa Fe has a house that is totally frequency free, and you can feel the difference.
Yeah.
Just a piece. I told you about the cell phone. I work with clients that have multiple chemical sensitivity and RF sensitivity. They're a sensor. You can take them in a room and you can use them as
they're meters. Yeah. Living meters. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I know what you're talking about, and all I can say is that I have a different priority, but I totally support raising that issue.
Well, your answer satisfies me 50%, but I always get that answer, and I understand, physicians, politicians, scientists, building scientists, we all have our priorities. But again, what's the sense of building green communities if people are sick because of the pollution, and the birds and the bees are disappearing? They're not coming back.
I agree. So you're right. It's an issue that it's been tough for people to get their head around it. The science is, based on what you're saying, is certainly ready for prime time now. At least it looks that way.
There's a Canadian toxicologist called Magda Havas. Magda worked on acid rain many years ago, and she said, one of the rare victories in the environment. So she moved on to another issue, and her website has U.S. Navy documents of 1969, 1972. 2,000 studies, bibliography of the effects of RFs on health. And public health here says, oh yeah, well, the radar operators were a lot more exposed than our kids are today. Well, I've got news for you, because many classrooms have industrial strength routers. So it's not true. What's really sad is that, 20 years ago, very few people were electrosensitive. Now, it's a bit like my signature Schopenhauer that I sent you. Every new truth, at first it's rejected, and then it's attacked, and then everyone says,
normal.
We've known this for years,
Sure.
But yeah, to me, it's I've been told that it's a bit of an obsession. Well, health to me is an obsession, and not harming, doing good and informing people to to empower them and act.
Well, I'll take this opportunity to internalize that and certainly talk more about it. There are things you can do with building design to address it. The standards aren't available to most people. It's available, but they're not available to most people. Most people don't ask the question. So the most important thing you can do is stimulate the question.
Yeah, well, the building topologists tell me when someone buys a meter, an RF meter, and they start walking around, everybody's interested. They find it fascinating. Then they look at the green, yellow, orange, and red lights, and they find out that it's thousands of times lower the heating threshold that's allowed by the FCC or Health Canada.
Yeah.
So it's just good to get that discussion going. So I do encourage you to share the two papers that I sent you.
Yeah, I've downloaded them already.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Bill Reed. In conclusion, I'm listening to the great talk you gave for Suprema in Montreal over the web a while back. I think I'm going to type it or ask them if they can send me the text, because it was a really great talk. And we cover so little in an hour that I have to come to meet you in Laval in late May.
Yeah, please do. I'll see if I can send you the organizer's name.
Michel Rousseau, you said, eh?
Yeah, well, he's one of the organizers, but then if you want to stop the recording, I can put something in the chat before we go here. And thank you, Andre, by the way.
Thank you very much. Where do we stop the recording? Right here, right here.